Welcome everybody to tonight's webinar. It is going to be on human factors with CFI Andrew and Joe. Again, as a friendly reminder, if you have any subjects that you'd like to see done, please send us an email, stop in, let us know. And without further ado, I will hand it off to Andrew and Joe to get it started.
All right, so tonight we're talking about human factors.
The factors that affect us as pilots. Not going to be external or anything. It's more who's flying the plane and also possibly with your passengers.
Right. So start with our introduction real quick.
I'm Andrew. I've been a flight instructor at Princeton since July of last year. And yeah.
I'm Joe. I've been a flight instructor at Princeton since February of last year. Currently working on getting my multi-engine and ATP eventually. That's the dream, right?
Oh, yeah.
All right. So
what are human factors, right?
So the FAA defines it as multidisciplinary effort to generate and compile information about human capabilities and limitations and apply that information to equipment, systems, facilities, procedures, jobs, environments, training, staffing, and personal management for safe, comfortable, and effective human performance. Mouthful.
Essentially what it means is organizing everything to make sure that you're going to be able to perform your best as you're flying, right? Because there's some factors that can degrade your ability to fly. So we want to make sure that you're safe to fly, you're good to fly, you're here to fly and not worried about any other external factors or anything else going on.
Right. And half of eliminating these human factor performance issues is just recognition of these issues.
Because sometimes they're hard to recognize. So you want to understand when you're feeling one of these symptoms of some of the stuff we're going to talk about tonight.
Right. And with that being said, we can break these kind of human factors up into a couple different categories. So we have kind of that physiological or aeromedical factors, the psychological factors, such as maybe some illusions or mental health issues, sociological, and technological.
Yep. So sociological, right? With your final passengers, anything, talking, getting distracted from flying the plane. Technological could be, I'm used to the 172, now I'm flying into the Diamond, and now I'm used to a G1000, and there's tons of buttons, right?
Yeah.
And it's difficult to understand, try to figure that out while flying the plane.
Right. We're going to talk a little bit more about all those things in that.
Yep.
So another way you could kind of break that down is with the 5P checklist. I don't know if you've heard of those before, but breaking it into checking these things before you start a flight. So pilots, passengers, plane, the plan, the programming, making sure all of these things are in check.
Because if you do this checklist, right, you go through all these things, you make sure everything is good and okay to fly, right? We have everything organized. It's going to put a lot less stress and workload on us as pilots. And we're going to make sure overall that, like I said before, we're safe to fly on this day. And able to setting everything up.
All right. So we're going to start with the pilot.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk a little bit, we're going to start off a little bit with more so the aeromedical factors that affect us. All right.
But before we go on that, we'll talk a little bit about some of the medicals, right? So before you do your first solo as a student pilot, right? Or anytime you're flying, you need to have what we call a medical, right? FAA medical.
And just to not interrupt you, but if you're just a brand new pilot, I would highly suggest getting this done before you even start your training. Save yourself some money if there's an underlying medical condition that might stop you from becoming a PIC of ATP. You might want to find out before you start sinking money in it.
Because flight training can be a lot of money, so it's always good to get that, right? If you're going to airlines, get that first class before. Make sure you're not going to spend all this money for nothing. So with that, we're going to the first class, right? So your first class, you need this if you're going to act as PIC for an ATP certificate, right? So that's at the airlines. For an airline transport pilot certificate, you need to at least have the first class. Then we go down to the second class. You need this if you want to act as second in command of an flying for an airline transport pilot certificate. So you would need second class, act as second in command. Meaning you could only act as second in command, not pilot in command. Then we move down to a third class, right? So this is going to be more general aviation. General aviation can still get first and second class, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But third class lasts a little longer, saves you a little money because it's a longer length of period when you have to renew your medical. So this would be used for private, recreational, student pilot, or exercising privileges of a CFI as a PIC. Then we go down a little bit further to basic med, which this is a little bit different. This is lower than a third class, but it's a medical education course, and you undergo a medical examination every 4 years.
And that's just with a primary care physician.
Yep. So it wouldn't be with an AME or anything like that. Just be with your normal doctor, and you would go through educational course and medical examination every 4 years.
And also, just to note, in order to get or be applicable for basic med, you do need to already hold a first, second, or third class in the past. You have to have had those three. So also, if you want to find out a little bit more about the regulations surrounding the medical certificates, you can look in the FAR Ames Part 61, 23. And then as far as disqualifying medical conditions for first, second, or third class medical, you could check FAR's Part 67, and they'll have it all broken up in there. And then basic med is Part 68.
Yep. And they break it down to what then you need. So on 6123, they explain the length, and they put a good chart out there for how long for what you're using it for.
Yeah, how long it's good for, the age requirements.
Yep, everything you need to know.
Right. So some of the disqualifying conditions we listed here, just to have a nice little list handy. So some of those disqualifying conditions, of course, going to be things like heart replacement, psychosis, substance abuse, epilepsy, things you would kind of expect or not really. If you were to get on a commercial airliner, things you would hope your pilot didn't have, like a bipolar disorder.
So it's all stuff that really would affect the pilot flying pretty much. Right. That could interfere with the pilot flying, whether, right, if you're with diabetes, if blood sugar is low or anything, that could cause your performance to decrease, right? We don't want to put you up there if you're going to be unsafe. So we want to make sure that you're all good with all these. And sometimes you can discuss with your AME, right, some medications or some stuff that you can take, which we'll get into the next slide a little bit. But you can also do some research on it before. Look up, if you have anything like this, look up more specific to what you have, because sometimes there may be a few exceptions. Right. And the everything is always changing. So always be on the lookout for when the FAA started. Maybe they don't accept something right now, but they may accept it tomorrow.
Right.
Right. So always take it case by case. Take a look, see what you have and what you need to get it cleared by them. Right. Then with those medical certificates, right?
You can obtain it on the site Med Express. There's a link down below. You just have to kind of pretty much sign up, make a username, enter some information, and then set up an appointment with an aviation medical exam.
Yep. And when you go through those lists, right, they'll ask you if you have any medical needs for any of these. As you go through the list, check yes, no, as you go down. And then you get the piece of paper and you give that to your AME, and they'll look it over, and then they'll be able to tell you, here's your medical, or we need to do some more things to make sure you're cleared. Right. So the link is right there if you ever had to go over there.
All right. So I'm safe checklist. So keeping up with that theme of the aeromedical. So before any good pilot flies, they should be asking themselves, I'm safe. So
am I safe as a pilot, right? So we walk through all of these illness, medication, stress, alcohol, fatigue, emotions, right? So when we talk about illnesses, we're talking about, are you sick, right? Do you have a sinus infection? Do you have anything that's going to affect your performance, right? Because if you have sinus infections, you're going to have pressure difference in your head and outside of your head.
And we're going to talk about that a little bit later as well.
Yep. And that's going to cause a little bit of pain, right? So are you going to be able to fly the plane effectively if you have a stuffy nose?
Right. On top of that, they also refer to medications. So not just prescription medication, but over the counter as well. Some of them are going to be no fly. So you want to kind of be aware of what you can and can't fly on. Next would be stress. So trying to avoid stressful situations before you go operate an aircraft. Alcohol. So
that'll be a big one, especially during these summer days.
Yeah. So it doesn't just mean, avoid, of course it means avoid alcohol while you're flying, but also how long you go bottle to throttle. So you want to think about the hangover.
How are you going to feel flying in the morning when you're a little bit hungover, you're a little groggy, you had to get up early for the flight, right? That's going to affect your performance.
Right. So good idea to develop a personal minimum for that bottle to throttle rule. The FAA recommends 8 hours between your last drink and when you go fly. However, I know for me personally, I like just have a good 24 hours in between.
Just to recover a little bit.
Yeah.
And this way you have plenty of time to detox and feel a little bit better and be ready for your flight that you're about to make. Fatigue, make sure you get enough sleep, right? This goes for all our students, right? So if you're feeling fatigued and you're I didn't sleep last night, I'm tired, it's better just to cancel a flight, right? Because when you're fatigued, you're not going to be learning as much as you can when you're well rested. And you're also not going to be as sharp with your skills, right? So you may not be realizing if the plane's descending a little bit, climbing a little bit, right? You're not going to be as sharp on point as you would be if you were well rested. So you want to make sure you're well rested, you're ready for the day, and you come prepared.
Yep. And lastly, emotions. So more so if you're having some personal issues with family members or relationship issues, things you might want to, just reconsider, because these issues can, cause distractions in the air, your mind's somewhere else. You might want to just consider saying, I'm just going to take the day off from flying. Things to keep in mind.
Right. And these all, like we said before, they're going to affect how you fly.
So back to that topic of
medications.
So the FAA do not issue medications. So AMEs cannot issue. They need clearance from the FAA in order to fly. They also have do not fly medications. The AMEs must provide additional safety information to the applicants, caution them not to fly until a specific period of time has elapsed. So it's kind of like you're on a wait list. So it might be okay, but they want to see if the side effects and symptoms
still persist.
Right.
As you're getting off the medication or anything.
Right. So basically, there is a big list on the FAA website, FAA.gov. You can if you have a medication, you can Google it and kind of get an idea, but you should always still consult an AME before taking any sorts of new medications, both prescription or over the counter. And we have next. So, just with those over the counters, so that can also include things like caffeine, aspirin, things you might want to be careful with, like stimulants. So you can still fly on them, but you have to be conscious that these things can affect how you fly.
And understanding the side effects behind, right? Like impaired judgment, prolonged wakefulness, nervousness, right? There's many different side effects you could encounter that could be distracting you. And we can see how this list goes down to substances. So what it is, the brand, generic kind of, right? Cigars, cigarettes, wine, liquor, beer. They can go through treatments, right? So sometimes treatment is, there's nothing you can do but just wait it out, right? You just gotta let your body recover and fly another day. And then you see the possible side effects to be aware about.
Right. So also one thing to be really aware about with, especially with antihistamines, is be very cautious of the wait periods that they have for the FAA's wait list. So I think it's Benadryl. They say they want you, it's not listed on here, but so with Benadryl, I know they say they recommend waiting at least 60 hours after taking Benadryl to go fly a plane. Right. So
that's how many days? 4? That's about almost 3 days. Yeah. That's quick math. So that is a pretty long wait period, right? So you want to know, am I flying within the next 3 days or so, right? can I take this medication now? Because if I take it now, am I going to be able to make that flight that I'm going to be doing in less than 60 hours?
I know Benadryl gets me super groggy. So, all right. So,
hypoxia.
The good stuff.
So, hypoxia, right? This is, we're going to encounter this more when we go to higher altitudes. And there's a few different types, right? There's hypoxic, hypemic, stagnant, and hystoxic. Right. So we're going to talk about all these as we go down the list, but understand that there's 4 types of hypoxia.
Yeah. And I feel like the one that gets talked about the most is definitely hypoxia. But I feel like it all kind of, at least from what I've seen people talk, how we talk about hypoxia, it all kind of gets put into one big umbrella term. It's just hypoxia.
Yes. They all do the same thing, right? It's a lack of oxygen going to our tissues and throughout our body. But they all do it a little bit differently.
So let's solve the question. Hypoxia.
This is what we encounter most of the time, especially if you're in an airliner.
All right. So as we go up in altitude, the ratio of oxygen, so 21% oxygen, 78% nitrogen, 1% other gases, that ratio stays consistent. We don't have less oxygen as we go up. We have different pressure. So,
what we call partial pressure.
Right. So, with that, our lungs don't move oxygen through our blood as effectively as they would at a lower altitude because the pressure is different.
Yep.
So that pressure differential kind of causes that hypoxia.
Yeah, so it's not able to transfer because it doesn't have the partial pressure, the amount of pressure that a single gas contributes to the total pressure. It's not as strong because it's like, think about it, if you're at the bottom of the ocean, right? You have a lot of pressure on you, but now as you climb further up, now there's less pressure. It works the same way, right? When you're at sea level, pressure is higher. Then when you climb, the pressure is going to be lower. So as we go up, right, we could encounter hypoxia. And we can see by this chart over here, if you're at 20,000 feet, you're at 30 minutes or more before you start to go unconscious.
Right. They call that the time of useful consciousness. So something to also keep in mind with this chart that they provided for us is it's time of useful consciousness, but you also have to think about when you notice the symptoms. So now that might have cut your useful consciousness in half.
Yes, because now you may take 30 seconds to realize what's going on, but that's 30 seconds out of 60 seconds that you already used to try to understand what was going on. Right, and we'll talk a little bit about more about that in a little bit. But then we'll move on to the next one, which is hypemic hypoxia. This is when your blood is not able to take up and transport the oxygen. This could be from abnormalities, sulfur drug, nitrates, and also carbon monoxide, right? You can't get enough oxygen to move throughout your body through your bloodstream.
Yeah.
Then we move into stagnant, which is now your blood can absorb the oxygen, but it's not being able to move the oxygen to tissues that need it.
Right. So it occurs when, you're having fun and pulling G's.
Yep.
But that's why we were talking about this the other day. They wear those like
the pants that squeeze their legs.
Their pants with like those fighter jets.
Yep. So right when you're pulling G's, obviously you feel everything want to go down. If you try to raise your arm up, you feel like your arm weighs twice the weight of your normal arm, right? So your blood acts kind of the same way. It gets pushed down all the way down to your feet. So in military and what you call Air Force, they have suits, right, that squeeze their legs, and what this allows it to do is keep the blood up all the way up in their head to keep it moving around. It's not all puddling down pretty much to your legs and your feet.
Right, and the same can be said also in colder temperatures. So also higher altitudes.
Yep, because now your body is trying to take away that blood flow from tissues that don't need it, just like your fingertips, right? That's why your fingertips feel cold when you're outside, because if your body wants to warm up, it's going to send more warm blood to everything they need, like heart, more important functions of the body.
Right. So super important to make sure you have a properly functioning cabin heater.
Because you can encounter carbon monoxide pretty fast too.
Yes. All right. It's toxic.
So inability of cells to effectively use the oxygen, right? So our body's absorbing it, it's transporting it, but now our cells cannot absorb it and use it for what it was made for.
Right. So this is typically caused by the use of alcohol, drugs, poisonings, and symptoms are more or less the same. It's all hypoxia. If you suspect, we're going to talk about these in just a second.
Yep.
But if you suspect any of the symptoms of hypoxia, the first thing you want to do is get down,
land, descend.
Instead of trying to figure out it's toxic.
Yes. Which one? But obviously, if you were drinking the night before,
more susceptible to it.
Yes, or anything like that, right? There's certain ways that we know which one's which, but the ideal thing is, as long as you understand you're encountering how to fix it, right? So the symptoms of hypoxia, right? You're going to have a carefree feeling. Flying becomes less coordinated. I would say it's kind of like you're intoxicated.
Yeah, they say it's kind of the same as like being under the influence. And I feel like that what makes it so hard to pinpoint.
Understand.
Right. Because if you start having that carefree feeling, it becomes a lot tougher to diagnose.
Exactly. Because now you're not functioning how you normally would if you didn't have hypoxia.
Right. They also say your vision might narrow. You might experience cyanosis, which is the blue fingernails and or lips. We have a little picture on the left-hand side of those hands with a little bit of cyanosis. And you can even see how tough that is to spot if you're not really paying attention.
And even at nighttime too, right? You may not notice that. Because if you have red lights around the aircraft, that's going to take the color out of your hands, right? So you're not going to be able to see it.
Okay. Also, you can experience headache, decreased reaction time, impaired judgment, numbness. But the big thing is just that sense of believing that everything is normal.
And that's the biggest danger with this, because you think everything's okay when it's really not.
Right. And that ends up cutting down that time of useful consciousness by a lot.
Because you're not, right? That 30 seconds you could have used to understand it is now 30 seconds left you have until unconsciousness. Okay. Now, on the other side, right? So hypoxic, I always mix them up. Hypoxia. Yes. Hypoxia is the excessive loss of oxygen. So now we move into what we call hyperventilation. This is an
of carbon dioxide.
Yep. So this can be caused by heavy breathing. Right. So this can be caused from stress, fright, or pain. So if you're stressed in the aircraft, right, you have a giant workload, you start to breathe heavier. You're going to lose a lot of carbon dioxide. And you can actually test this on yourself. If you're breathing heavy, right, you start to feel lightheadedness.
And just like that, all of our Zoom viewers
down. All right, so you can experience this for yourself at home if you ever breathe in heavy a bunch of times, right? You'll start to experience symptoms, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But understand that if you feel stressed, fright, or pain, you're unsure about something, right? This is how you're going to hyperventilate. So some of the symptoms, right? You're going to have visual impairment, right? So your vision may become blurry, may be difficult to see things. Then you could also have, obviously, lightheadedness. That's a big one if you start to experience it. Lightheadedness, you're probably going to feel first.
Muscle spasms, hot and cold sensations, the worst case, unconsciousness. So really important to kind of recognize these signs and symptoms that you might be hyperventilating, and try to figure out a way to keep yourself calmer. A lot of people suggest breathing exercises. If you have another pilot in the plane, maybe let them take the controls for a minute while you regather yourself.
Yep. Kind of understand, right? Sit back, relax.
Yeah.
Take a deep breath.
Even for the student pilots, especially with practicing stalls or things that aren't necessarily a dangerous situation,
but that you're not
they
used
impose a lot of stress on.
Yeah.
Or getting beat up in the pattern by us.
If it's a windy day, right? Some people may be a little bit stressed with landing the plane, right?
The first time you land a plane is one of the most stressful times as it is, even on a calm day.
Yeah, you get a little bit of adrenaline rush, right? Adrenaline rush. So obviously you may start breathing heavier because now you're trying to focus. Your body goes a little bit into like a fight or flight, essentially. So these are some of the symptoms that you'll see.
For the student pilot, I would say, especially if you're having like a long pattern day, don't be afraid to just tell us, the CFIs, like, hey, I need to take a knee for a minute. Can you just take the controls?
Yep. Or we can do a slow taxi back right to the runway.
Yeah.
So you give you more time to just slow your breathing, right? And if this is a hyperventilating,
especially if it's a recurring issue where you start feeling as though you might be hyperventilating and it's affecting your performance, there's plenty of breathing exercises you can kind of learn online to help yourself relax a little bit. Taking slow, deep breaths, and don't let it degrade your performance.
Yep. And what you're pretty much doing when you do this, you're replenishing the carbon dioxide into your body. Right. The one thing with hypoxia and hyperventilation is they are similar, and it's better to treat it as hypoxia rather than hyperventilation.
To a degree.
Yes.
I would say be aware of the situation. So if you're at 2,000 feet, someone cuts you off in the pattern and you're freaking out,
got a lot of stress,
it might not call for an oxygen mask and a medical team. Yep. You might just need to take a couple deep breaths. But on the other hand of that, if you're, 10,000 feet or so, or even 5,000, you could always have a heat relief. And you're starting to experience kind of some hyperventilation signs, you're not feeling real well, it very well might be hypoxia.
That's important. So take it case by case, right? What just happened? Did I turn the heater on possibly? Did I turn the heater off in the plane? How am I feeling, right? What's going on, and how can I try to diagnose this?
Right.
But it's always better, right? Hypoxia has worse outcomes than hyperventilation. So always make sure, if you're unsure, treat it as hypoxia, but try to look at the situation.
Best case scenario, or in either case, try to land.
Yep.
It's better to figure out problems on the ground rather than in the air.
Yeah. And anytime you're not feeling well, whether that be anything while you're flying, just go back and land, right? Don't try to force the flight just because you're trying to get somewhere.
All right. Okay. Middle ear problems.
So this is where we're going to have two different pressures, right? So there's outside of the body and then inside the middle ear and nasal sinuses. So normally these two different pressures are equalized, right? So if inside my head is equalized to the pressure around me right now, but as I climb, the pressure around me decreases. And what this means is the pressure in my head wants to escape out of my head. So think about it like when you go flying on the airliner, right? You have a bag of chips. When the airplane climbs, the pressure around the bag decreases, but the pressure inside the bag remains the same, right? Because it can't escape.
Right.
Now, think about it as your middle ear and sinuses. If you have a stuffy nose, a cold or anything, your head and your sinuses is pretty much that bag. Right? The pressure can't escape out, can't equalize. This is going to cause a little bit of pain.
Well, depends on what you. And just to kind of add to that, I'll throw my own personal little story. A while ago, I decided to go on a flight when I had a little bit of sinus congestion. And it was a while, but I said, you know what? I just got a little bit of sinus congestion. Just I'm fine. I feel okay. Got in the plane, climbed up to, it was only about maybe 3,000 to 4,000 feet or so. Felt fine the whole flight until it was time to come land.
Once you start that descent,
it's not a pleasant feeling. You do, like my sinuses, my ears were popping. If you're having sinus problems, don't fly, please.
Yep. And you're going to feel this more as you're starting to descend. Climbing, for most of the time, it's easier for that air to escape. But when you descend,
it's nowhere to go.
Yep.
And it sucks.
So always be aware of, right, if you start to feel pain in your sinuses, in your ears, let us know with your flight instructor know, right? Because what we can do is start to descend slower, try to give it a little bit more time to equalize. Because if all of a sudden I decrease the pressure outside very fast, right, that's going to put more pressure on your eardrum. And if you have, in severe cases, not really in our 172s, but if you were in like a pressurized cabin or anything, there also is a possibility of blowing your eardrum out. So always be aware of, if you feel this pain, right, let's try to descend a little bit slower. This way we keep a controlled descent as we're coming down. So, like we said, some of the symptoms are pain in the ears. So during decline, the pressure inside will remain the same as the pressure outside decreases, forcing pressure out wherever it can. And then as you're descending, the pressure inside remains lower as the pressure outside increases, causing the pressure to push in wherever it can. Right, just like that bag of chips in the airliners.
Exactly.
It's essentially the same thing, just a difference in pressures. So treatment, like Joe said,
don't fly if you're sick, even if it's allergies. Please don't do it.
Yep.
My eyes were like popping out of my head.
Because all that pressure, like we said, it'll try to force its way out wherever it can. So if you're sick, your nose is stuffed up, don't go fly that day. Just reschedule and go fly another day when you feel a little bit better. Another thing is you can chew gum. You can also yawn. What this does is I'm not going into that one yet.
I saw the maneuver.
So right, when you chew gum, if you yawn, it'll kind of release some pressure out. It moves your muscles around there to allow the air to effectively move in and out of your head.
All right. And then last is the Valsalva maneuver. Mm-hmm. So kind of holding your nose and trying to blow. They also say you shouldn't try to like blow too hard with it. You don't want to damage your ears.
Because when you do that, you're pressurizing all of your sinuses.
Right. So start gentle and work your way up a little bit. Don't go too hard at once.
If you're shaking, trying to stress it, force the air, doing the Valsalva maneuver, don't do that because you could damage your eardrums more if you keep trying to, right? If you have too much pressure, like you said, if you descend too fast. Cool.
Oh, yeah.
Motion sickness. So if you have new passengers, people who haven't been flying before.
Right.
Sorry. This can be caused by the brain receiving conflicting messages about the state of the body, right?
Right. So that kind of lack of control for the passenger and getting tossed around a little bit, not knowing what's coming.
Understanding where the plane is at, where the horizon's at, getting your sense of where you're at, essentially. Right? And if you have someone who's nervous, who's stressed, who's on medication, this could affect it.
Right. And especially the diet, too, will affect it. Diet, the heat, that's the big one.
Assess the air conditioning, don't do much. Especially on a 90-degree day.
No, not at all. So you really want to kind of make sure your passengers are comfortable before you take them up. Make sure they're not overly anxious. They don't suffer from motion sickness. They're not on any sorts of medications that might make them a little bit on the nauseous side.
Mm-hmm.
Check the winds. Check the turbines, air meds.
Make sure it's a good day for them to go up. The important thing is make sure everyone knows if they feel sick to let you know as the pilot, right? You'll find some people try to hide it because they're embarrassed by it. Nope, let them know it's totally normal. That if they know, let me know because we'll descend and we're going to go land and we'll wait till you feel a bit better. Then we'll go back up and we'll see how far we can go. And we'll land a little bit, like give you a break, right? Make sure people are okay with telling you, hey, I'm not feeling well. Let's land for a little bit. Let me regroup and let's go back up. So some of the symptoms that they're going to experience is discomfort, nausea, dizziness, paleness, sweating.
Exactly what you would expect.
Vomiting.
Motion sickness.
Yep.
But the big one, vomiting.
Carry bags with all new passengers, right? Always have that barf bag with you just in case, right? You always want to be prepared for it.
Right.
Because it could affect you as a pilot if you don't and someone's not feeling well.
Yeah, and definitely always carry a sick bag Even if the passenger says, "Oh, I never got motion sick in my life,"
always have it on you. And even today, I'll carry, even if I go up with the student, right? I'll still, if it's bumpy out there, I put the bag right next to me, just in case. Sometimes if I don't feel well, if the student don't feel well, right? There could be some things that affect you.
Yeah.
So always be prepared for that. Right. It's always just a good thing to have.
Okay. So first thing you want to do is get those air vents open.
You'll notice when people aren't feeling well, they'll start to feel hot. That's why some of the symptoms are sweating, right? They're going to feel like it's hot. They need more cold air, and that cold air will actually help them.
Focus on an object outside on the horizon. That kind of gives you a sense of
where you're at.
Yeah, kind of like a, rather than getting kind of tossed around, it gives you that, what's the word I'm looking for?
Oh, no.
Kind of helps them find their bearings and that sense of being level, kind of.
Yep.
And on top of that, you want to fly straight and level. You don't want to keep doing more steep turns and stalls.
Yeah, that's not going to make them feel good.
Nah, probably.
And the other thing with this is for people who it's the first time flying, not so much. But let's say for people who have been flying for a while, right? If I'm flying with Joe, let's say all of a sudden I feel sick and Joe's flying. I may take controls and start flying because me flying the plane actually helps me understand where the plane is at, what I'm doing, right? But obviously, if you have someone new who's never flown before, it's not going to make it better for them.
Right.
But for someone who's an experienced pilot, if you switch over, right, you take controls if you're feeling a little bit sick, helps you understand where you're at.
Right, to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, especially while you're learning the plane and it's not doing what you want it to do.
Yeah.
It's enough to make you go insane.
Yeah, it's a lot more. So you're flying with your buddy who's a pilot and they're not feeling well, let them fly.
Now, what if both of you guys aren't feeling well?
You both fly. Just fight each other. Yeah.
Yeah. But if you and I were to go take a flight together and both of us were saying, "Oh, I'm not feeling well. I think we both have
videos."
What could it be?
Carbon monoxide.
That's a strong indication, I would say.
Yep. If not only one of us is feeling ill, but both of us, then at the same time, there might be a bigger external factors.
Right. So, carbon monoxide poisoning. What is carbon monoxide, first of all? It's a colorless, odorless gas, and it's a byproduct of aircraft engines.
Right. So the fuel burning with the air produces carbon monoxide.
Right. So the biggest cause, at least for general aviation, for carbon monoxide poisoning is going to be maybe a leak in your heater system. So as cold air enters the aircraft, it goes through this heater shroud that kind of travels over the mufflers and heats up and gets vented into the cabin. So if there's kind of a leak in there, that's where you might experience
carbon monoxide poisoning.
And that carbon monoxide poisoning kind of results in that hypemic hypoxia. Another really interesting way that carbon monoxide poisoning can present itself in an airplane that I just learned pretty recently was with dry ice. If you're transporting dry ice in a airplane and you're not storing it properly, that dry ice goes through sublimation. So that gaseous state of the dry ice kind of produces carbon monoxide. And that can fill up the cockpit and cause carbon monoxide poisoning.
And you may turn off the heater thinking, why am I not feeling better? Well, you got ice cream in the back, but it's on the dry ice. And that could be what's causing it, right? Yeah. So always be aware of little things like this that could cause it.
Right. That's funny because I never thought about transport ice, let alone it being dangerous in flight.
Yeah. Could be hazardous.
Right. So some of the symptoms of carbon monoxide poisoning: headache, blurred vision, dizziness, drowsiness, loss of muscular power. So like we said, it's kind of similar to that motion sickness.
Yeah.
Can be difficult to spot the difference, but like we said too, if you're with somebody else, a passenger, another pilot, and you're both, have headaches and you're feeling
it's a smooth day. Well, maybe it's not. It could be something with the plane. Carbon monoxide, right? That heater has a leak in it.
Right. And treatments. First thing you want to do?
Turn off the heater because 80% of the time, If you're experiencing carbon monoxide, that's what it's going to be caused by in our 172s.
Unless you have your dry ice for the party.
Yep. So if you have dry ice and you got ice cream in the back, that may be it.
Right. So on top of turning off the heater, get those windows and vents open.
Get that fresh air into the cockpit.
Right. If you have aviation oxygen on board, good idea to use it. And the most important part,
land.
And then
get on the ground.
So we have a nice little picture of a carbon monoxide detector here. I believe we sell them at Princeton as well.
Yep.
It's just a little sticker you can take with you. It turns dark like that if there is carbon monoxide present. Also, those sentries, those ADS-B devices that Andrew and I have.
It'll set off an alarm, and it's very loud. It's like a smoke detector almost when you're in the plane.
Right.
So if it senses it, it'll go off. And also, if you have your phone, iPad linked to it before flight, it'll actually tell you we're detecting this many parts per million.
Right.
It goes that far in depth to let you know.
I think the new Lightspeed. This is the Delta. There's a new Lightspeed headset I know that also has a built-in carbon monoxide detector.
That's pretty.
It's a good $1,000, but so tons of ways you can help prevent this. Just simple, a little sticker.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's what, $10? Yeah. Okay.
Dehydration. So this is especially important for us coming up to these summer months. Right, it's going to be hotter out. Inside the plane, you're going to have that air crank on you. But it's important to be hydrated. So you want to make sure you're drinking plenty of water before your flight, and also during your flight, but not too much where you're going to have to go to the bathroom constantly.
Yeah, just enough.
You're going to have a lot of diversions on a long flight if you drink too much water. Right, so dehydration is going to be a critical loss of water from the body. So your body consists of mostly water, so we want to make sure we're replenishing all that water.
Correct.
So dehydration is caused from flight decks. Also, if you've been drinking the night before, you may be more easily dehydrated than if I wasn't.
Right.
Also, you'll feel fatigued because your body isn't hydrated. And you always want to make sure you carry water, especially, like we said, during the summer months. During the winter, you find you don't drink as much water, but during the summer months, you're going to find you're sweating.
Yeah.
And you need to replenish that water in your body much, much faster than you do during the winter months.
Right. And you especially want to kind of limit that caffeine intake.
Mm-hmm.
So caffeine acts as a diuretic, and it kind of blocks the absorption of water into your system. So on top of kind of blocking out water going into you and hydrating you, you're going to be expelling the water a lot faster.
Yep.
So try to limit your caffeine intake. I know I'm not going to give caffeine up, and coffee's a flight instructor's best friend.
Yeah. But drink plenty of water with it, right? You should be at least drinking at least 2 quarts a day.
Right.
Nitrogen and
before I forget, I have one more thing to throw in there.
Sorry.
Especially if you're going to be flying a lot, invest in like a nice
show.
Doesn't want to show.
Wait, let me see.
Invest in like a nice insulated water bottle. It's only $24 or so, but when I was doing my private training, when I was doing private, I used to bring one of those plastic jugs with me.
Yep.
To try and stay hydrated. And by the end of the flight, it would be boiling hot.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't even be able to get through it. By the time we were done our first landing, it was boiling, and I was like, "All right, I'm not drinking. I'm dehydrated." Absolutely, 100%. Just go on Amazon, get a nice insulated water bottle. Cold water tastes a lot better.
Yeah. And you put ice in it too.
Exactly. That's just my rant, but
So then we move into nitrogen and scuba diving.
Right. So as we mentioned before, our atmosphere is made up of 79% nitrogen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
79, 78. You take that.
78.
Somewhere around.
78. So is mostly nitrogen. So that most of the time that nitrogen just kind of sits around, doesn't do much in our system.
Mm-hmm. We have it in us right now as we're all sitting here. Right. There's always nitrogen present.
Right. So as you go in, when you do scuba diving, you go down in pressure. that nitrogen gets absorbed into your tissues, muscle tissues, a little bit easier, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
but now if you go scuba diving before you fly, you want to wait at least 12 hours.
right.
We recommend 24 hours though, before you go and fly.
Right, because that nitrogen just kind of sits in your muscle tissues until it has time to, rid itself of that excess nitrogen. So if you keep going up in the atmosphere, that nitrogen kind of bubbles up and causes the phenomenon known as the bends.
Yep, and it's essentially your blood is boiling.
Yeah, little nitrogen bubbles.
Yeah.
It's going to cause extreme joint pain. It's just not a pleasant time.
It's going to be extremely painful.
Right. So the FAA recommends waiting at least 12 hours if it was a non-controlled ascent. So didn't require any sorts of decompression on the way up from your dive. If you're going to be going over 8,000 feet and it wasn't a controlled ascent, they still recommend 24 hours. And generally, if it did, if you're going to be going over 8,000 feet, they recommend 24 hours for any scuba dive, whether it's controlled ascent or not.
So it's always better, essentially, just to do 24 hours. Right? Don't hesitate on doing 24 hours rather than trying to force the flight in just to get it in.
Okay. And we were talking about this earlier. When I was learning this, I was like, oh, that's kind of a weird thing to stress about for the commercial training.
Mm-hmm.
But as I become an instructor and I started meeting a lot of pilots, I'm like, there's a lot of boat people. Like, there's a lot of people that just
pilots
scuba dive. And, yeah, we're an adventurous breed. We like the water, the air.
Exactly. Anything but land.
Yeah, so this is particularly important for, commercial, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Especially, they probably have any scuba diving training.
All right. So kind of shifting gears a little bit, starting to get more into like the mental, physical, mental still. But
now we're going into fatigue, right? So this is when you feel tired, right? So there's going to be two kinds. There's going to be your short term your acute and then your chronic. Essentially, acute is going to be your short term and chronic is going to be your long term, right? So some acute fatigue causes are going to be mild hypoxia, right? So it could be one of the four that we were talking about earlier. Also, physical stress, right? You have a high workload, you're stressed because you got a check ride coming up.
Yeah.
Right? You could be fatigued because you're studying for that, you're stressed about it.
Or you could have just been up all night playing a video game.
Yep, that too.
Like Microsoft Flight Sim.
Yeah. It could be multiple reasons, right?
But you're going to be tired.
Yeah.
And it's just a short term. There's a short term reason for it. Like,
yes. It's not going to extend long term.
Right.
So some ways that we prevent this acute fatigue is going to be proper diet. Make sure you're eating, getting plenty of nutrients that you need.
Sleep.
Also proper rest. Like I said, come prepared to fly. Make sure you're well rested the night before. And also adequate stress, right? So you don't want a ton of stress, but a little stress is good to keep you continuously learning. But if you feel overstressed, right, you're going to be fatigued because it's just a lot to take in.
Right. And this was just a story I heard. I'm not sure which airport it happened at, but it's a very common thing where pilots, they might have gotten stuck at an airport or they have a small time to depart and they're tired. Things can get missed really easily. So that's why we had that little picture there with the guy landing gear up. I heard a story where the guy had to leave an airport at like 4 or 5 in the morning. And he was exhausted and
wasn't properly rested.
He was flying all night the night before. And I think he was in his own airplane, but he ended up forgetting to put the gear down. So simple checklist item that you would think you would hit every time, but when you're tired, things change.
You forget about little stuff like that. That's why it's always important to follow the checklist.
Right. And I feel like when you have that physical exhaustion, that fatigue, you might miss checklist items a little bit easier than
you would normally because you skip over it by accident and not even realize.
Right.
So always get that proper rest. Make sure you're all good.
All right. And on the other end of that, there's the chronic fatigue. So that's more your long term. It could be continuously high stress levels. You're having home or family life is just not going great, or you could have an underlying medical condition that's causing you to be fatigued or not get proper rest. So that you would have to have diagnosed by a physician, or you might even want to consider taking a longer term break from flying until you get your head in the game and can get
rest. And you can be focused. So after that, we have stress, right? So this is going to be your body's response to physical and psychological demands.
Right. So a little bit of stress is okay for you. It keeps you sharp.
But we can't have too much.
Right. Just enough. Like we were talking about like sharpshooters. They have they did like a test where they like measured their heart rate.
Yeah.
So a little bit will keep you sharp.
But too much.
Yeah.
We do a few things. So with that, we have acute and chronic stress, just like we have acute chronic fatigue, right? So acute stress is going to be that immediate threat, right? So if something happens, oh no, the plane's ascending too fast, I need full power right now, right? You're stressed with the workload.
Yeah, it's like being startled.
Yeah, exactly. You're not expecting all of a sudden hit a little bit of wind shear as you're trying to come into the flare. Right? You perceive this as danger. This would trigger your fight or flight, and that's pretty much acute stress. With ongoing acute stress, this can cause chronic stress, right? So if you always have acute stress, always feel unsafe or anything, this could cause chronic stress, right? So if you're afraid of the plane or anything, right? These short flight lessons that you're going, you're flying, right? But now you're leading it to chronic stress where you're worried and stressed before you even get to the airport, right? It's a longer term thing. So chronic stress is the level that presents an intolerable burden. I don't want to go fly. I'm too stressed to fly before you even get there.
All right. And on top of that, with the stress, if you're really in a stressful situation, especially like an emergency situation, that's a high stress situation. Yes. Your vision is going to kind of narrow into. So you have to be aware of these things and definitely try to find a way to slow things down, especially if you're like lost or something. That's a very high stress situation too. I think I told you the story when I was a student pilot and I got a little turned around. I wasn't quite 100% lost, but I was definitely turned around. Unsure where you were. Yeah, it was one of my first solo cross countries. I got a little turned around. So I got really stressed out for a minute. The first thing I did was I had to say to myself, okay, take a second.
The plane's flying.
Breathe. Fly the plane.
You got time.
Figure it out.
Yep. Because the moment you stress and worry about it, that's
you're causing more problems for yourself. Because now you're going to start missing things. You're going to panic.
And not know what to do.
So priority 1, fly the plane. Take a deep breath.
Yep.
Slow things down a bit.
Exactly. Take it step by step.
Yep. And also importantly, remember your training.
What we trained you to do in case these conditions.
Yep.
Then we go into hazardous attitudes. So.
Oh yeah. So hazardous attitudes. The FAA has little anecdotes that they say you should use to combat these 5 hazardous attitudes. So the first would be macho, so taking chances is foolish. Invulnerability, it can happen to you.
Never feel like, oh, it never happened. It hasn't happened to me yet. It can happen to me.
Right. Resignation, so you're not helpless. Try not to give up, especially if you're in a stressful situation or something that might seem a little overwhelming. Impulsivity, not so fast. Think first. And anti-authority. Follow the rules. They're usually right.
Yep. Don't try to break them. We put rules in place because of things that have happened previously that we learned our lesson from, right? So always follow the rules.
Yep.
So if you ever feel any of these, always tell yourself or any of these.
Right. It's all about cultivating that culture of safety with these.
Yep.
All right. Spatial disorientation. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So this is what you want to, this is how you perceive yourself. So your orientation to a specific reference point, like the horizon, right? This is if you're unaware where aircraft is with the movement of the plane. So if I turn right, you're not focusing what's going on. You feel like, oh, the plane's actually turning left.
So a lot of that's going to be based on visual cues as well as your vestibular system. So the vestibular system is kind of within your ear, that inner ear as well. So the organs in your inner ear are going to kind of help you figure out how you're positioned when you have the visual cues. So if you didn't have visual cues and you sense that you were in a certain attitude and you came out of it, you might get a little disoriented and not know where you are in space.
Yeah, maybe a little confused.
Right. Definitely a lot easier to get disoriented when you're in IMC.
Because you got to rely on those instruments. And even though you feel like the planes are going this way, your instruments are telling you this, but you can't visually see it outside.
Right. Anything else you would add to that?
No. So just be aware of this and always trust your instruments.
Right. And tying back into that, there are certain illusions based on the inner ear. So when you take those visual cues away, we're not going to go super into the illusions tonight, but you have things such as the somatographic, elevator, borealis illusion, the leans, the graveyard spiral / graveyard spin. Those are the big ones you hear about a lot, especially with like JFK Jr. So that would be like if you were kind of like in a cloud and you were turning and you didn't feel you were in a turn, you might realize that you're descending and start pulling back on the yoke to fix that. And that would put you into the graveyard spin because that's just tightening up the turn.
Yep. It's like doing the steep turn, right? When you pull back, it's going to tighten it up.
Cool. And
on visual illusions, right? So you have bigger runways. If you're going to land at some place like Trenton compared to Princeton, there's a much bigger runway. So if you're landing at Trenton and you're used to landing at Princeton, it's going to create the illusion that the aircraft is lower than it actually is, leading to a higher approach. All right, vice versa. With the narrow visual, you're going to think the aircraft is actually higher than what it normally is.
Right. And the same with an upsloping or downsloping runway. Downsloping runways are going to make you feel like you're lower than actual. And an upsloping runway is going to create the illusion that the aircraft is higher than it actually is. So do you want to consult the chart supplement before going to a new airport and be aware of how high up the runway slopes or how wide it is, and be mindful of the illusion before it happens.
Yep, be aware of it, right?
And if you have visual lights available, use them.
You have your PAPI lights, right?
Okay, more visual illusions, but nighttime ones.
Yep. So we talked a little bit about these in our first webinar. So nighttime, if you want to go back and review those, some of them are like black hole illusion, autokinetic, false horizon, fascination, which is like fixating on one thing, and also flicker vertigo, because now it's nighttime, right? We have a few different illusions, like a mountain looks like a giant black hole, false horizon, right? A big city or New York, a skyscraper sideways could look like the horizon to you when it's really not. A few things like that.
Right on. All right. Mental health. So this has always kind of seemed like a taboo subject within aviation. So conditions such as psychosis, bipolar disorder, sometimes personality disorders that they are usually automatically disqualifying from obtaining an FAA medical certificate. However, the FAA's stance on mental health, as well as the general stigma around issues such as like depression or anxiety, things like that are affecting pilots, has been shifting quite drastically in the last couple of years. I know it's getting talked about a lot more now. Before it seemed like it was a lot like a big.
It was all. Yep, and it was if you had this, you can't fly.
Right, which in the long term prevented a lot of pilots from seeking help for something that was totally treatable.
Yeah,
and they were perfectly fine flying the plane, but they just needed proper channels to deal with their emotions.
Exactly. And so that was preventing them from getting their medical, from getting help if they needed anything, because of that. So the FAA is constantly changing stuff. So if you have anything like mental health, just be aware of what the FAA is updating. Like I said, they're constantly changing. So stay up to date. Keep reading the articles that they're putting out.
Right. And if you pull up the next slide. So I was looking at the FAA's website and some of the steps they've been taking to eliminate this mental health stigma. So they're trying to increase mental health training for the medical examiners, supporting industry-wide research and clinical studies on pilot mental health. So they're looking into, they're doing more studies, hiring additional mental health professionals to expand in-house expertise and to decrease wait times for return to flight decisions. They're completing clinical research and amended policy to decrease frequency of cognitive testing in pilots using antidepressant medications. So all these things, they're trying to expand on how they treat mental health, how they look at it, especially with, I know they just started approving antidepressants for pilots to fly on, and they're trying to help that turnaround time as well so they can get back into flying sooner. So it's getting better for them.
Yep.
Because I've heard a few of those stories where, this pilot doesn't feel as though they can go for help because they don't want to lose their license.
Yes.
And it ends up
it makes it 10 times worse when they could have got help and then just took some time off and then came back and been okay.
So moral of the story, don't be afraid to seek help.
Yep. Exactly. Just do some research, consult the FAA, right? Look up what's going on, what they're changing recently. So mental health, right? That's inside, but now we have some external pressures as we're flying, right? So these influences are more of your flight that create a sense of pressure, right? So if you're flying someone and you need to get passenger cargo to some certain location, right? You're going to feel stressed and think, oh, I have to get it here. You're going to lower pretty much like your personal minimums to go fly maybe in through a thunderstorm where you shouldn't, but I have to get those packages there, right? These are external, or I may lose my job. These are external pressures.
Right. And you hear those stories where like the pilot's like, well, the thunderstorm's not supposed to be here until about 2, and I can probably get in between them. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't end well. They had
2 storms come
together. Right. Shit. You hear a lot about that as a pilot. The idea that they push themselves, their own personal limitations, in order to complete a flight that probably shouldn't have been completed. I guess another instance that I hear is like some people kind of push it a little bit with like wins when they're like, oh, I gotta get this check ride done so I can go to this college
and do this. But right, safety is number one.
Yeah, I hear. You've heard of not like anything where it's been like an incident or an accident, but like student pilot, well, it's gusting 20, 25, look out of my range, but I gotta get this check ride done because I'm going away to school in a week.
Well, it's better to not let those external pressures get to you and wait a little bit, right? Don't sacrifice safety over I have to get this check ride done, right? Safety is always number one.
Communication.
Always communicate to whoever you're flying with, right? So this is not your
logical portion of human factors.
Mm-hmm. You're flying with the flight instructor or one of your buddies, right? You're still have to talk and communicate what's going on.
Right. So brief the pilots and passengers before you take a flight. Let them know what they're in for. Be on the same page. Like when we take flights together, we kind of brief each other before we go up. We also have what's known as a division of responsibility.
So when we flew out, we did a flight to Block Island in Joe a few weeks ago. And we got to a point where it was, okay, you're flying the plane, I'm doing comms. We're going to switch over at this point, right? We talk to each other, know who has what responsibilities with what. I have the responsibility of reading checklists, you have responsibility of verifying, right? We use that crew resource management, talk about who's doing what and how we're going to execute what we're going to do. So like how are we going to do this instrument approach, right?
Right.
How are we going to?
And that really makes a flight so much less stressful when you know what the other guy's doing and what you're doing.
Yep.
Rather than fighting over controls or having one pilot bored out of his mind.
Exactly. Doing nothing.
Nah, yeah, that was a fun trip.
Yeah.
But on top of that, don't be afraid to talk to other pilots around at the airport on the ground, especially if you're going to an unfamiliar airport. Of course, you could read online, read the chart supplement, but in order to find out a little bit more about the airport, there might be some towers, or it might be a weird runway that's not it's something you're not used to. Talk with other people, make friends. Everyone at the airport that I've talked to has been perfectly friendly. They're just all want to talk about their experiences at that airport.
Just like if you came into Princeton, right? You wouldn't know helicopters right-hand pad unless you obviously should have researched for and looked at it, but just kind of
you would see it on the chart supplement, but there might be something you wouldn't know, like, oh yeah, there's a big rock quarry at the end of runway 28. Can't miss it.
Or we use 28 when the winds are calm because there's no buildings at the end.
Right. So there's all these little nuances at other airports, and it's really good to talk with other pilots before going to other airports. It just helps break down that stress too, especially with tower airports. It's nice. When I was a student, I would talk to people and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, they're really nice there," or they'd be like,
It all depends on what airport you're going to.
Right. So
I'm super nice. So don't be afraid to talk to help understand the airport a little bit better.
Right. And on top of talking to other pilots on the ground, don't be afraid to talk to them on the radios. There's a lot of incidents that occur when pilots don't speak up, whether it be taxiing or tower related. Tower, they're people too.
Yep.
They make mistakes. They might have given you incorrect instructions, or they might have given you instructions that might interfere with safety. Don't be afraid to call them out.
Yeah. Tell them I can't do that. Or even, like I said, feel like they're experiencing something like it's not only just us that can experience human factors. Maybe ATC has experienced human factors too. Right. So it doesn't always just apply to pilots. Right. It's any pretty much workload that you have. Right. People could have certain factors affecting their performance and how they would normally.
Right. And you want to think of human factors as not just affecting pilots. It affects pilots, controllers, maintenance.
And any job career, really.
Every aspect of aviation is subject to
human factors.
Yeah. It's an ecosystem, aviation.
If a maintenance, if an A&P, right, is rushed to get airplanes out because they have a big workload, right, they're rushed for this. They have that stress, acute or chronic. Could be multiple versions. So be aware it's not just in pilots.
Right. All right. So that's what we're going to talk about this part of it. It's a safety briefing.
So, right, whenever you have passengers, you always want to do your safety briefing. So you want to go over, this is how you use the seatbelts. This is how you use the air vents if you feel too hot. If you feel too cold, I can just hear.
Right. And also if they feel that motion sickness,
let them know.
Let them know how to use it.
Yep. And this way, you can see signs that, they're turning on air. Maybe they're not feeling the best. Keep a closer eye on them. Also, let them know, right, here's a fire extinguisher. This is what we're going to do in emergencies, how to exit the aircraft. Let me know if you see any traffic, anyone. If you hear ATC talking, be quiet. I got to listen to them.
Right.
And then any questions that they have, answer.
Right. So one thing I like to do with my safety briefings, especially with like new intro flights and stuff like that, when I brief on emergencies, I like to be on the same page. So I tell them, if we do have an emergency, I'm going to fly the plane clearly.
Yep.
I'm going to hand you this checklist, show them where the emergency checklist is, and tell them, listen, just read the checklist. I'm going to fly the plane.
Yep.
You read, I fly.
Yep. And I'll verify. I'll ask for the next one once I've completed the step.
Right. And even when I fly with experienced pilots, like I fly with another instructor, I like to try to be on the same page with them with the emergencies as well.
Exactly. And then just talking about it. And any questions that they have.
Right. All right. So getting into technological gas saturation, stuff like that.
So this is going to be if you're used to flying our Garmin 430 172s, Now you're hopping in DA40 with the G1000 with the autopilot. Now you got to adjust the manifold and RPMs. If you ever fly a plane, you'll see that, and now you have much more workload than you would in what you're used to with the 172.
Right. Especially with, like you said, like the manifold pressure, and if you transfer to a complex airplane, it's a lot higher workload.
Yeah,
and you might be moving a lot faster.
Mm-hmm. So don't be afraid to schedule ground on a plane that you're unfamiliar with to get familiar with the aircraft, but go with the flight instructors. They can explain everything to you.
Right. Do as much research as you can before you get into a plane. But don't be afraid to call someone, especially if you already have your license and you're like, oh, I don't want to bother the instructors. It's just a GPS. It's all the same stuff. No, don't be afraid to sit down with you and kind of
go over it. And with that, right, make sure you have it all figured out before you get in there. So if you're programming things, make sure you have it all set and ready when you do your run up.
Right.
And then if that fails, always have your backups, your paper, your iPad, right? Always have your backups to help you to organize everything.
Okay. So why is it important to recognize human factors? So approximately 80% of general aviation accidents are human factors or human error accidents. So it could be something like forgetting to check the pitot tune, not doing a proper pre-flight, not checking your exhaust.
So following the checklist, essentially.
Right. Or not checking the weather.
Yeah. There's a thunderstorm coming in, but we're fine.
Or if you just didn't check the weather at all. It's not the weather's fault.
You didn't check it?
Yeah. So recognition of human factors and identification of aeromedical and human-related factors, it's going to help increase that correction time. So you have more time if you recognize the signs of hypoxia.
You have more time to diagnose it, figure it out, and treat it.
Right. Anything to add on that?
Nope.
I think that's all we got.
That's all we got for tonight. So any questions or anything? All right, if no questions, we'll hand it back over to Gabby and we'll let her take over.
Thank you. Great job. That was fun. As fun as human factors can be. Thank you everybody for tuning in. No, seriously, it's always good to be reminded of like the acronyms and everything. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we'll have a webinar for next month, and we'll probably take off for the summer. But stay tuned. Keep checking the newsletters, and we'll be sending emails out to keep you all updated. And hopefully the weather will be good more continuously, and we'll see you all flying more consistently.
Take care, everybody.
Good night.
Thanks for coming out. Have a good one.